This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, Falk, you can share your screen if you want.
No, sorry, it's just words from me, no images
Okay.
today. Thank you, Marike. Thank you, Agnieszka, for the invitation. I'm actually not strictly reporting on a project or presenting a project, but I'm giving a summary of a two-day workshop, a virtual roundtable that was sponsored by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft and organized by the Preußische Staatsbibliothek on 22nd and 23rd of February. And its subject was, and that's why I was invited here, the title of my paper, Research-Oriented Cataloging and Digitization of Incunabula in German Libraries, Requirements and Perspectives. So that was one of an ongoing series of roundtables organized by the DFG on the German national bibliographies such as VD16, VD17, and now also on incunabula digitization, cataloging. So the intention of the roundtable, or one of the intentions, was to formulate and find guidelines, or rather to collect material for formulating guidelines or recommendations with regard to future incunable projects in this area. The main questions of the roundtable were on which level and on which technical basis copy specifics, especially with regard to provenances, of course, are hitherto to be described and presented. What could be an ideal reference platform for copy-specific data, and how to provide catalog data for research-oriented versus collection-oriented, that is, scholarly approaches. There were approximately 30 participants in this two-day workshop, most of which were librarians. The first, and of course, that lasted for about 12 hours, so I cannot sum up all the details. We hope to get some minutes or protocol of this session, but it has not yet arrived, so perhaps we can then circulate it. The first section consisted of short presentations of all the regular incunable enterprises, the large ones, you know, GW, ISDC, and then followed by MEI, Inca, and BSB Inc., so the Munich catalog. IPI, the Incunabula Provenance Index, was not discussed. The second section was dedicated to problems such as current cataloging practices in ongoing projects at Leipzig, for example, at Cologne and Vienna, and on the question of metadata administration, which I'll leave out here today, and also on OCR for incunabula, followed by a discussion of options for copy-specific description in German cataloging systems. And also, and very important in this regard, the question of multiple copy digitization. And finally, a member of the DFG administration explained options for the funding of incunable projects, and I got the impression that there are actually not very many in the moment. Karen, I don't think she's here with us. Karen Limperherz gave an outlook on future ISTC developments. For example, the ongoing addition of private collections, of copies in private collections, and also the addition of shelf marks. And she had presented the wonderful idea to organize an ISTC day on which users and participants can publicly, I assume, in a video forum, can publicly discuss problems, wishes, and requirements, which I find wonderful and plan to imitate for the GW. And Christian Jensen spoke about the perspectives of incunable cataloging within this CERL framework. It is expected, as I said earlier, that the BSB will assemble a working group to formulate the above-mentioned recommendations for cataloging, including aspects of their integration of incunable data into the international research data infrastructure, also in the national research data infrastructure, die nationale Forschungsdateninfrastruktur, also focusing on aspects of international networking. I will now shortly mention some of the main points of the many points of the round table, which stuck to my mind especially. So one point that is a bit delicate is the future of Inca, especially concerning its hosting and future operation. That is still an unsolved, unclear problem. If not, the existence of Inca is very much in danger, so much I understood, but that has been announced since about 15 years with no result yet. Even though one must say, when you look at Inca, there's still some progress made, and there are also plans for further additions and ongoing additions. So there is still work on it, but the perspectives are somewhat unclear. And there was also nobody in the audience who could elucidate further what is going to happen, including the director of Tübingen University Library, where Inca is hosted now. It was said more than once, very often indeed, that with regard to digital copies, it is very desirable from the scholar's side and also from the librarian side to have as many copies and not only as many editions as possibly available in digital form. So scholars want no restrictions, explicitly want no restrictions such as only unique copies are to be digitized. So when you're putting up a digitization program, you can be sure that the scholarly audience will want you to digitize as much as possible, which of course from our standpoint of provenance or binding scholarship research is absolutely inevitable anyway. A couple of, perhaps briefly, the numbers, the GW has now almost 19,000 editions with links to digital copies. And in this 19,000 entries in the GW, we find, I think, about 30,000 links to digitized copies altogether. So that's still less than 10% of the overall incunable transmission, but well, we've come a long way, but there we are now. In this regard and in many others, one main point and a problem not to be solved easily is the persistence of data and the persistence actually of entire repositories. As evident as all of you or many of you will have experienced that, evident in the many broken links that are also to be found in ISTC and GW, simply because projects seem to change their URLs and internet addresses on a regular basis, and for which we always have to be deploying like troubleshooting troops all the time, finding the new ones, substituting the old ones, or eliminating them altogether where links have disappeared. Also discussed as critical issues were the costs of data holding. So if you have a large amount of digital images, it costs you a large amount of money, and also the interoperability of data as a general problem, which is for which no final solution from anybody could, of course, yet be provided. Another problematic issue was that was identified during the discussion, and that's more down onto the copy level now, the proper cataloging of collected volumes, or as you all know, the German expression Sammelbände, a practice which, as it is now, has not been satisfyingly solved, and which is, of course, a very important question for provenance research, but also for binding studies, and of course for general historical and literary questions and research questions. Then some ongoing or planned projects were presented, such as the cataloging of church libraries ongoing at UB Leipzig, so for Annaberg, Halle, the Marienkirche, and Pegau, with about 800 copies altogether, and a major project in the German federal state of Hessen, with libraries as in Darmstadt, Wiesbaden, Marburg, etc. Subject of a statewide copy-specific cataloging project, which is now in preparation. The DFG spokesperson explained that it is now also possible for private collections and international participants to make digitization efforts in the framework of DFG projects, but applications need to come from a German institution, which also has to guarantee the persistence of the data. It was stressed that the German union catalogs provide an enormous amount of provenance data, but I'm not so sure whether this is really true, and I have not much experience with that, so some input would be welcome. So, because they have simply not struck me as overly informative in this regard. Then, sorry. A couple of scholars from various disciplines were also asked about their particular specific requirements. For example, an art historian demanded that copy description would have to contain a detailed identification of illustration and rubrication styles. And with regard to technical points such as details of printing process, aspects of paper analysis, etc., it was said that this had to be very in-depth to be satisfying for research purposes. In my opinion, and I also voiced this during the workshop, such an expanded, you could call it a maximal approach, would slow down all the cataloging, every cataloging project massively, and would probably endanger all project plans and deadlines from the beginning. Not to speak of you must find a person or persons first that are able to bring on this kind of qualification that you, for example, need to identify illustration or rubrication styles. That can hardly be provided by an individual scholar or librarian. Then there was a point of the criticism of the quality of digital copies and of different viewers as available online. Questions of resolution, download options, but also for metadata. And there are problems with references to individual pages, depending on how the pagination in the digital copy relates to the pagination of the original copy, right? That is a problem that has not been seen clearly enough, but for scholars, it is a real serious problem. Okay, and one important point for us, discussion on MEI. It was said that from the German point of view, MEI is quite a standalone project, which due to its data structure and also to the variable quality of its entries, will be hard or perhaps even impossible to connect to the comprehensive German union catalogs. I'm not speaking about the GW, but on the German, the Verbundkataloge. Especially with regard to norm data, which, for example, are available for provenance research via the so-called Provenance Wiki of the GBV, the Gemeinsame Bibliotheksverbund. And you need to know and remember that many German libraries are obliged to make their cataloging data accessible via this and other union catalogs. So we cannot expect much flexibility there when they start cataloging their incunables in this union catalog framework. And my opinion and impression is that German libraries will at this point hardly choose MEI as their primary cataloging framework, but it may well be that existing data from Inca, for example, if technically suitable for MEI, can be acquired and integrated without major problems, as demonstrated recently. I'm leaving out some smaller points, just saying that for many of the smaller libraries, or even for many of the university libraries, incunabula may be their oldest and most valuable holdings as far as printed books are concerned. But given that they are not in heavy use, they cannot really claim any kind of priority in the library's everyday business. So some libraries are still reluctant to prioritize their incunabula collections over other more asked for collection segments. So to conclude, there were lively and very diverse discussions on these 2 days, and it became clear that there is much ongoing work. However, and I mean, I have to disappoint you. We did not come to a resolution and a result and are now marching all in the same direction. So there's no really common plan now recognizable in the moment. We'll have to see whether the expected guidelines will make an impact in this regard. And also whether the international connectivity that is required by the DFG and other sponsoring bodies, there much remains to be done, especially in my view, regarding a closer link between German libraries, MEI, and international scholarship. So that was it for me. I hope we've got some minutes for discussion or questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Falk, for your presentation. Very interesting. Such a meeting